Hi guys. Um, we are in John chapter 12 today, and we're looking at what happens after Jesus resurrects you. So, Jesus had resurrected his friend Lazarus, as we know, and he had been in the wilderness after this. And the reason he was in the wilderness after this is because the unbelieving Jews were still trying to kill him. And they were trying to kill him even more so now because of this resurrection. They knew they couldn't deny what he had just done. And so they wanted to try to keep their control over the masses, their control over those within their camp, and the Gentiles as well. They didn't want Jesus to get a following because they knew that it was going to mean trouble for them, or so they thought, with Rome. So they didn't want to have this religious leader, whether he was true or false. They didn't care. They just didn't want this going on in their jurisdiction. They were afraid. They were self-preserving, and they didn't want Rome to find out that there was something weird going on in their area. And so their only goal was to get rid of Jesus. They didn't care what he did. They didn't care the good that he did. They didn't care if he was God's son. They didn't care. They only cared about number one, which was themselves, and keeping their positions and keeping their safety and security in what they already knew. So Passover's coming, though, so we all know that Jesus has to keep the feast. So he heads back into town for Passover after being out in the wilderness, after raising Lazarus for a while. And he goes to Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house. They throw him a dinner in gratitude, right? I mean, they must have been grateful. I mean, he just raised their brother, and of course he was their good friend, and they loved him. And so they believed in him, so they throw him this dinner. And so in John 12, 9 through 11, we find a large number of Jews hearing that Jesus was back in town, right? They hear that Jesus is at Lazarus' house eating this dinner. Word travels fast in a small town, right? And the Jews go to see him, some of the Jews. And so a large crowd forms at the house of Mary and Martha. And so, I mean, like, you think about this, like, wouldn't you go see, like, who is this guy? What's he all about? Like, did he really just raise someone from the dead? I mean, these religious men, it says a large crowd of Jews went to this house. So these religious men are very curious. They're very interested in finding out about who Jesus really is, or what he's really up to, one of the two, or both. They want to know what's going on, because these are the guys that are in control, right? These are the guys that are all about what's happening in the religious world. But their leaders, chief priests, and the leading elders and things, these guys aren't so curious as they are concerned, right? They don't care what Jesus is about, but they need to get rid of him. So here we have this crowd of Jews coming to Jesus at the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And so, as we've already been told, the chief priests and leading religious men have already determined that Jesus must die so that they will not have trouble. And that's their motive, right? These men are self-preserving. They're very prideful. They aren't willing to hear anything about Jesus, and they're self-preserving at the expense of Jesus's very life. They don't care who he is, or they don't care if he's the real deal. The only thing these guys care about is keeping false peace with Rome and keeping control over those whom they consider their subjects, right? True peace with God is secondary, tertiary, or not even existent at this point on their list, right? In verse 10 makes clear their darkness. If we just read it, John 12, verse 10. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. John 12:10. Wait, what? Now these religious murderers, not only want Jesus dead, but they want Lazarus dead too. And so why, right? Why is that? The text tells us that the reason that the most religious leaders in God's house in Jesus' day want both Jesus and the man he resurrected from the dead is because the guys that used to follow them were going away and believing in Jesus. So their guys were going away. Their guys were believing in someone other than them to be their leader and their authority. Their guys were beginning a new kind of faith, the real kind, rather than the fake, manufactured, false faith that they had extended to them by these religious leaders, right? Their guys were realizing that these guys weren't their guys, but God's guys. And so the only problem was that their guys, they weren't their guys, right? They belonged to Jesus Christ. And so these new believers in Jesus who happen to be Jews, they belong to God as his children, not the religious men and their agendas. And so now they're finally figuring out for themselves that Jesus Christ is their Savior, their Master, their Lord. And, you know, nothing really makes prideful religious leaders matter than when they lose control of their subjects and their subjects stop bowing to their bad leadership and find out there's a better leader out there, and his name is Jesus Christ. So it wasn't just Jesus that the self-preserving religious leaders sought to kill, though. They sought to kill the one he resurrected, Lazarus. Look how they drilled that blind man that Jesus healed, and how they sought to instill fear in him and his family. In fact, anyone who even so much as said they believed and confessed that Jesus was the Christ was threatened to be put completely out of the synagogue at this point. And we read that in John 9:22. And wow, that just sounds so familiar to me. It really just does. Happens now. It happens now, and I am living proof that that happens today, 2019. And so when religious men lose their control to the true King Jesus, they seek to kill. And why do they do that? Why do they seek to kill, steal, and destroy anyone who would be resurrected and be a true witness to why we ought to follow after Jesus and not man's religion, not man's methods, not man's man-made rules? Why do they do that? That's what Satan does, right? Well, it's what antagonizing false men do when they need to feel power over people, and those people begin to leave their abuse and their falseness for the truth of the gospel. And so any and all of us who are truly redeemed by Jesus Christ will be targeted as those who must be hated and crucified right along with him. I mean, the world's going to hate you, right? And it's just sad when the world is the church. But that's what it was then, and that's what it is now. These were the most religious men that were seeking to kill Jesus and the men that he healed and resurrected. So let's not forget that. The reason is that we will not be controlled by false religion, false narratives about our God, or false peace among false brethren. We won't. We can't. Not if we're following Jesus Christ. It's not in the rule book or the agenda that we follow. And so power-hungry religious men will not put up with that kind of stand. They couldn't possibly allow that to be proclaimed in their camp, because their camp is saying, you follow me. I'm the leader, not God. Me. Whatever I say, that's what you bow to. That's what you listen to. That's what you submit to. And anybody else outside of that, you silence, shun, get rid of, kill, and destroy. That's what religious men do. And so they will seek to rid us of their tiny little worlds and their little kingdoms so that they can continue without interruption and without the masses figuring out that Jesus Christ is the Lord, right? Not them, Jesus Christ. And that whomever the Son sets free is free indeed. They are not in bondage to anyone or anything, not Rome, not religious rules, not religious men, not false peace, nothing other than Jesus Christ and his commands. Not theirs. Not theirs. And many a religious leader cannot handle that fact. And so they put you out. That's what they do. And you simply, you can't control people who already have a master to whom they answer. No one can serve two masters, right? That's what Jesus said. He will hate one and he will love the other. He will love one and hate the other. When Jesus Christ becomes our true and only master, we will not bow to false religion or any of its ringleaders. So the only logical thing left to do when you cannot control those who are exposing your falseness, your pride, and your greed with gospel truth is set out to malign, discredit, kill, steal, and destroy them by any and all malicious means necessary. This is what they did to Jesus. This is what they did to Lazarus. This is what they did to the blind man and his family after his healing. They sought to silence the truth and all the witnesses of it so that they could keep a false facade of pseudo-control in a world which belongs only to God Almighty. What foolishness. And we can look at that and we can say how foolish that would be. But that's what men do. That's what leading religious men do then and now. And if anyone wants to hear about it, I have many stories to tell of this very thing happening today. So it's foolishness, but it's what religious men do to try to keep control. So, but Jesus is the one who has control, so we need to remember that. And so I guess Lazarus wasn't the only one who needed a resurrection. These religious men needed resurrected from their false lives of deceit and malice in the very worst way. Did they get it? I don't know. I mean, I hope that in the end that these men repented, but we know that they put Jesus up on a cross before they did so. So, it's sad. It's sad. But I guess it happened then, it happens now, and we just, we're told in the scriptures to beware the wolves who wear sheep's clothing. These were the religious leaders of the day. These were the men who had the most truth, who had the most reasons to believe in Jesus. They had the most knowledge. And so when you go putting religious leaders up on pedestals and saying, well, they are above correction and they couldn't possibly be wrong and we just need to submit, you better be careful. There's a lot of wolves out there and they're wearing sheep's clothing and they may look like sheep, but their actions prove otherwise. And they won't show mercy to you or anyone around you if scorned by the truth of Jesus Christ and its witnesses. And so that's the determining factor. Do they bow to King Jesus, or do they fight against him and seek to kill, steal, and destroy anyone who would confess his truth in place of theirs when they disagree? So anyway, that's what happens after you're resurrected by Jesus. You will be hated, and it might be surprising by whom. It might be surprising to you. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you guys have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.